Hey, this is Christian Roldan.
And Jordan Morris from the Seattle Sounders Football Club.
And you're listening to
This is Nos Odietis.
This episode of Nos Odietis is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Odietis since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, Oshan! Let's go!
A sideline fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rodriguez through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Niko leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is going to
It's gone! There it's gone! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
Is that what you young people call twerking?
That Porter says cheated.
You want to win? This is the Seattle Sounders, bro.
Welcome to a special edition of Nos Odietis, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and our subscribers. We're recording on January 24th, 2024. I am your host, Jeremiah Oshan. Joining me today for this live recording from Long Acres is friend of the show, Niko Moreno, as well as Sounders GM and CSO, I guess is the right title, Craig Waibel.
It's a long title.
It's a long title.
A lot of letters in there.
CSO, though, feels a little like doctor who does surgery.
Feels like I studied to get that.
Right, exactly. But thank you so much for doing this, Craig. Obviously, Niko, thank you as well. But we are here. We just finished about an hour ago, we finished the Pedro de la Vega signing press conference. Is there a sense of relief for you to just be like, okay, he's here, everything is signed, we can plan for this? Or has this been really done for weeks and you guys have just been stringing us along?
We've just, it's been years.
Years.
Been stringing you for years.
Yeah.
No, this is, they're never done until they're done. That's the craziest part about this is even when you're 100% sure, you feel like you're about 70% sure. And so until the last document gets a signature, it just builds stress. It's weird. You never get closer to relief. So this is a great day. It's a good moment because obviously the documents have been done for a couple days, but in order to get it out there to release it so everyone can talk about it openly and how does it fit, what does it mean, and start having the fun part of sports, right? The fun part of sports is now we start speculating how does this impact and what are the decisions and how does it fit and all those things. That's what makes this whole thing enjoyable.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to get there.
Yeah. So I definitely want to get into all that stuff, but because I don't want to get it lost, like this, I've been to a lot of these signing press conferences.
Yep.
I don't know that I have been quite as blown away, frankly, by a signing. Like his presence was like, he came off as humble. He came off as articulate. He came off as engaging with the questions and having thoughtful answers. And here I'm listening. This is me listening to him, like trying to basically translate it from Spanish. You actually understood what he was saying, Niko. Are my impressions fair, you think?
No, absolutely. I think that he was very careful in what he said. He came across knowledgeable of not just the soccer side, but the history of the game. Because one of the laughing moments that didn't quite get translated correctly was the fact that he had talked to the Almadas and the Audas and all these people, but he has to talk to Diego Valeri. And immediately he's like, ha, 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 but I know he's from the opposition, the rivalry, right? So that alone tells you that, he's a young guy that didn't just come because this is going to be an opportunity for him to either move on or expose himself. It is showcase that is MLS in today's day and age, but he also has that value of being engaged with the club. And that's kind of what you hear from him out of Lanús, because he was embedded into that club and he was embedded into that academy and that process. So I feel like he wants that here, and that makes me feel really good about the player.
Yeah, the other question that I thought came off very endearing was when he was asked about wearing the number 10, and he sort of like looks to Brian to make sure it's like, is it okay for me to go here? And he like not only understands the weight of the idea of being a number 10, I guess he had worn 10 for Lanús as well, but he also understood who wore it before him, that little bit about how they gave me his phone number and I was too shy to call Niko Ladero, and how he wants to work for it and he wants to earn it. And it was just like everything. You can't coach that sort of answer. Like it feels like it's coming. Or maybe you did. Maybe I'm giving too much credit, but it was very endearing and like that perfect mix of like humble, but like, no, I want the 10. I want this weight. I want to, like, I understand what I'm asking for here. Were these the impressions that you had of meeting him? I mean, you talked about how you felt like you vibed with him like right away when you met him in Argentina.
Yeah, it's wild because we don't speak each other's primary languages. We both kind of I'm speaking really, really basic Spanish,
right.
you know, and his English is much better than my Spanish. But it was really interesting when I went to Buenos Aires to study the players that we had scouted and our group had identified. You know, there was a list of 3 or 4. And after those 5 days where I sat down with multiple players and went and watched them in their environments, I came home with a list of 1. You know, it was really remarkable. I think what you got today in the press conference is exactly what I got when I went down there. It was just this sense of something's different. Something makes sense. Something clicks. There's a seriousness to him. Mm-hmm. There's a matter of fact in his answer about what he is trying to accomplish. But it's all under the umbrella of that humility of team and the understanding of, like you guys said, he knows the history.
Right.
This is not a formality for him. He did the homework, and he had done that homework before I sat down with him with no reason to do the homework.
Right.
That was a really informal meeting, you know, and so it was. I think you're getting what I got. So it's nice to hear that I wasn't that far off.
You know, one of the things that I contrast this with, and this is going back a long way, and this is not a commentary on the player at all, but like I think back to the first time I heard Alvaro Fernandez talk about Seattle, and he didn't know how to pronounce the name of the city, and you just go from there to this player who, you know, granted Seattle is a bigger city and all these things, but like I just think it really does illustrate how far, like what kind of player this is, that you don't take it for granted that these guys know it all what they're getting into.
No, and there's parts to all of us that people are going to figure out over time. One of the things that didn't come up, nor did it really need the opportunity to come up in that press conference, you know, he moved out of his family's home last year to prepare to be a professional, to prepare to be on his own, to prepare psychologically for what that next step was. That was before I met him, you know, so he's been thinking in a really mature way, you know, some would say beyond his years, but many would say, you know, parallel to the way soccer works.
Right.
If you want evolution in the game outside the country you're in, you've got to prepare yourself to grow. And he's been doing that. And these are little things that'll come out over time about him. And I think we're all going to learn more about him.
Yeah, intangibles have always been a big thing for Seattle anytime you scout a player. And he definitely seems to have that. But also the soccer component is there. However, I will say that it's never easy. And you talked about courage. It's never easy because not only is there pressure on the player, but on you by getting a player that young for that much money. That, of course, it could be a home run and you could get this player that's amazing, but there's always the gamble of adaptation, of taking a little bit longer. So when you approach that, I mean, we kind of talked about it a little bit just a couple of minutes ago. This club was used to just bringing this older players that were proven commodities, but now you get a player that is part of the U23 for Argentina. Mm-hmm. He's a prospect that everybody knows. So how do you go about that, taking that leap and, you know, saying this is the guy we need?
I think it comes down to the mentality of the entire group, right? So we start with the coaching staff. We say, where are we? You know, where are they? Do they need a veteran player to walk in the locker room that can start on day one with the team, with the walk in with street cred, right? A different kind of street cred. Or are we in a position where our leadership surrounding what our positional needs are support any profile? I think that's where we started. was we had that conversation and the coaching staff said, no, this locker room has leadership. This locker room has proven identity. This locker room is not going to be disrupted by any player. So we can look at anything. So we, from a front office standpoint, that's like the blank slate. That's where we all live as fans. Is, oh my goodness, like what? Like where can we go from here?
Right.
All the paint is on the palette, nothing's on the canvas. And so that's where we got to start. And then, you start shopping with a budget, whatever that number is. And thankfully in Seattle, those numbers have never been preventable. They don't prevent you from having that creativity. And so as we narrowed the list down and down and down and down and down from, anything from the most experienced proven players to least experienced, and you start narrowing in on the bullseye of what do you think is going to add to this group in scenarios. So then we start playing the game. Okay, we're down 0-1. Okay, we're up 0-1, or we're up 1-0.
Mm-hmm.
We're tied 1-1, but we need a win. We're tied 1-1, but we need to defend. Like, how do our coaches coach those scenarios? And players start to stand out. And then, of course, personalities start to stand out. To your point, intangibles, when you get to know them.
And to go off of that, and I'm going to credit Jeremiah because it wasn't until 2 minutes ago that I realized that, and I hope you weren't trying to bring this up, but I remember when Moreno was going to come to MLS, there was a lot of hype about him. And maybe there hasn't been that much hype about this player. And I just looked at the stats, thanks to Jeremiah, and this guy played more minutes, had more goals, better stats than Moreno in Lanús. So
at exactly the same age, basically.
He flipped my brain. He really did. I honestly had not even thought about that until right now.
I'll say this, like backhandedly, of course. It's hard with personality to get it across on tapes, but it's we do tend to do our jobs every once in a while. No, I mean the homework's there, right? And that we're not blind to that. We've seen profiles that have worked in MLS. We didn't do this on accident. We didn't do it without comparing him to perhaps Moreno, in our statistical analysis and our data. But when the naked eye will tell you these are two different players, two different types of players. At the same time, I think one thing that Seattle, I used the word courage in the press conference a couple times. And one of the reasons is because this club's never been afraid of creating heroes and not necessarily needing to buy heroes. Some legends of our club, Niko, Raul, who's been a legend, Freddie Montero, these weren't player names that the fan base knew on day one.
Right.
Clint Dempsey, everyone knew, and he came and proved it, right? Obafemi Martins, some guys with higher profile that came in maybe with a little more of that street cred with our fan base. But one thing we've never been afraid of is creating heroes. And Christian Roldan fits that mold. Jordan Morris fits that mold. The future, look at our young guys that played a lot last year that are contributing, that are going to continue to contribute. You're starting to see fans wear jerseys of some of our young guys, including Jackson Reagan, including Josh Tensio, including Reed Baker-Whiting, including Leo Chu, including Danny Levin, including, the list is getting longer and longer. Creating those heroes is not something we're afraid of. And I think it takes a lot of courage to do that because the coach has to believe they're going to get the results to stick around long enough to make that player a hero. And they've got to give them the minutes to do it. At the same time, the club's got to be dedicated to the process.
Sort of along those lines, this is every year, maybe every coach in MLS talks about how, we've got competition everywhere. We've got, no one's spot is safe, this, that, and another thing. But you look at the roster the way it is now, and it feels like a much more genuine thing to say that you've probably got 6 starting caliber players in that front 4. You've got 3 or 4 central midfielder or defensive midfielders that could all be starters. You've got probably 5 or 6 defenders who could all be starters. Steph Fry's position seems reasonably safe, but everywhere else, it feels like there is genuine competition, and De La Vega is a pretty key component of this, where it seems like you could slot him in any number of spots, and that's going to have a cascading effect on other spots. does this feel like the most complete roster that you've? And I say that knowing that there's probably room for change, but like at least if you just look at the starting lineup.
Yeah, I think balance is probably the word I would use. It's probably a safer word, which is why I would choose it.
Yes.
But I mean, look, some of the names I didn't mention when I listed young guys: Obed Vargas, Cody Baker. I mean, again, there's more players. As soon as we start talking about the central midfield, we've got another youth national team player in there, and we've got another outside back developing. I think these provide balance for the coaches to look at and compare. I think it provides pressure, finally, in every position. That's another word I would use. Like, if you're not playing well, there is someone to go in now.
Right.
It doesn't matter what position you play. And even there, Andrew Thomas and Jacob Castro, are they a little further away from putting pressure on Steph Fry? Sure. But do our coaches probably have the courage, given the rest of the management and the way they're balancing the rest of the decisions, to maybe make that decision? Yeah, absolutely. I think you've identified the one spot where maybe the decision looks easier.
Mm-hmm.
But the balance on the rest of the roster, I think, does make that statement a bit more genuine than perhaps in years past.
And that's fair. And I think Yamar Gomez-Andrade is one of the names that you guys turned into a hero. The guy's been unbelievable from the day he got here till now. Right. Statistically dominant year after year after year. And this is a guy that you guys got on a very good deal. And nobody had any idea that this guy was going to just dominate the way he did. What I will say, though, is when it seems like the approach this year is that you're going to use that core group to set your floor high. But in terms of that ceiling, how high is it when you go back and look at maybe what didn't get done in the playoffs last year? Because this is going to be almost the same starting lineup that, there were times where maybe they weren't as dominant as they could have against the diluted Dallas with some injuries, and then the LAFC game where you just couldn't get a goal.
Yeah, I mean, the game can be brutal sometimes. But I would say, going back into last year, the belief in the roster is something that I work on with my group. My group being the front office, the coaching staff, the support staff, everyone that's around, is we have to believe in our roster and in what the possibilities of the roster are, or the players will pick up on that. Whether that's the medical staff, the performance staff, the equipment staff, the scouting, whatever it is, if a player picks up on it, they're going to share it, right? And so if we don't believe in what we have, we've got to talk about it, we've got to be honest about it, and we have to have the courage to make the next decision to move on. So going back to that fundamental hope that that's how we're operating, right. These conversations have to be genuine and they have to be frequent enough that the coaches can speak their mind and display their concerns, express their concerns. And at the same time, I have to be able to sit on the other side of the table and go, I hear you, but we're going to march, and we're going to march this way. And that's something that Brian and I have a good relationship where sometimes he tells me, sometimes I tell him, but it's not a lecture hall. No one has the head of the table every day in this group. And I think that's what, also going back, taking that back into the players, I think when the players start to pick up on that in the second half of last season, you start to see a bit more a collectivity, a collective effort. And I don't ever want to come close. It wasn't lack of effort that the results weren't coming from, but Seattle's got grit, and we didn't have grit all last year. That's something that has to exist for us to win. It's that balance. But at the end of the day, it takes goals. What was missing in the LAFC game was the goals, a great performance by a goalkeeper. But in those big moments, that's when you get judged the most, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something we don't hide behind. I don't get to hide behind it, right? The whistle blows and the opinions start. Good, bad, and different. And that's something that we've got to embrace a little bit more this year, take it a little bit more personally, and make sure that we do the job.
How does De La Vega fit into that, sort of both from a grit perspective, but also from a finding goals perspective, generating goals?
Yeah, I mean, look, people will start watching games now and go back and find video. The grit won't be questioned. The work rate won't be questioned. The two-way effort won't be questioned. There are times at his age where you'll catch him, but that's kind of normal for the age. That transition into MLS where it is back and forth a little bit more. It's not retreat into this tight defensive structure and then counter. Things that are probably a bit more nuanced for his upbringing and his soccer knowledge to this point. But where he fits is in the attack. He likes to go at players. He likes to run at players. We're going to see a different version, but a similar mentality to Leo Chu. The ball hits his feet, and he has one or two things on his mind. And the first one is advance the ball. And I think that whether it's on the dribble or on the pass, he's looking positive. He's not an east, west, south possession-based player. And I think that's where the first step comes in. The second step comes in is, his goals are the same as our goals. He needs to produce in order for this to prove itself correct, right? And part of that is on the team. We have a great team. We have a great base. We have a great core. We've got a lot of guys that we expect goals from. But we're adding to that list. Now we expect goals from Raul, Jordan, Christian, Albert, Leo, Pedro. We expect our, quote, reserve players, supporting players to score goals as well. This year, also that responsibility has to be shared by our defense. When we get set pieces and we produce the amount of chances we produce, they've got to contribute not to, and take some pressure off individually, off Pedro, off Leo, off these other guys in order to get these numbers up.
Yeah. Look, you've never been afraid to answer tough questions, and you are probably as transparent as anyone that I've ever seen in your position. When it comes to the injury aspect, he had a big injury. He's young enough. In today's day and age, science has changed and medical advances have been huge now. But how much did he go into making sure that was good? Playing in artificial grass, the cliche is that it's so much harder for injuries and stuff. How much do you guys give thought into that when signing Pedro?
We put a lot into it. Look, we've analyzed the data before injury and after injury. These are we're not going to avoid the topic, and we didn't avoid it when we were looking at him. We looked at the numbers before, we looked at the numbers after, and we said, what are the differences? And where can we spot differences? To his credit, to your point, medicine's come a long ways. Recovery's come even farther. It's one thing to fix it. It's another thing to really rebuild it. And I think sports performance, along with the nutrition that we now know about, how to rebuild the medical apparatus, all these things go into it now. So much more opportunity for players to recover strong, sometimes stronger, because they're not playing. They get to focus on their body. And some of the numbers would suggest that that's exactly what happened with Pedro. In many ways, he came back a little bit, probably more balanced. Of course, his age plays into this too. He was still growing tremendously during that time. So to be able to stop and add muscle and add power in his recovery was huge. And that's what we saw. Is there concerns? I don't have any. He's played well. He's played consistently since recovery, and at the end of the day, we can all roll our ankle walking up and down the stairs. Unfortunately, I don't think injury comes into play now in terms of worry.
Nice.
I look at this signing and I see, it's been reported as a pretty significant transfer fee. Obviously, we see a player who
that's accurate
is young. And you look at the profile and you think, okay, I'm sure the Sounders would love this to be a situation where he is here for 10 years and he's the face of the franchise. But I have to imagine that there is an element of, like, we are buying you look at a Miguel Almiron, and here's a player who came in at 7.5 and they sold for 28 or whatever it was. If you're weighing those two possibilities of, getting a player that's effectively spends his career here, or someone that has some sell-on value, like, how are you balancing those things, and how do you look at this?
Our last two player purchases have fit this category. So our last 2 player purchases are Pedro de la Vega and Leo Chu.
Right.
And they're both significant. However you define significant, I promise they both fall into that category. Right. And so is there a quote exit strategy involved? I think there's an exit strategy element as to the when and the how. Obviously, when you make an investment, now all of a sudden the return of the investment plays into can you move a player and when you move a player. So, if the number gets high enough and it makes sense for the club and it makes sense for the player, it kind of becomes a no-brainer in that sense. Would we love Pedro to stay here? I would love Pedro to stay here for as long as he wants to, whether that's his entire career or not. But the performance has to match. And frankly, the performance for our last 2 investments, and specifically the investment we made in Pedro, is that we think there is an opportunity for him to improve his game here and get another opportunity at his age. I mean, I would love to tell you that every player's ambition is to play for the Sounders forever, but I don't think that's realistic, right? We need to live in reality. This is a great club. For some, it's a great club for 8 years. For some, it's a great club for 2 years. For some, it's a great club for a little while, then leave, then come back. We've seen all these play out, and they all play out well. I think for the Sounders, I don't think it's a scary proposition to say that we're going to look at selling a player in the next 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. Well, I think that just means we're becoming part of the soccer ecosystem, the actual soccer ecosystem, not just a little bubble that we live in up here, but we're starting to participate on a much greater scale. And if an exit strategy is 28 million on a player you've invested, a significant amount, but not 28, and you can turn around and maybe that equals 2 more players. There's an economic structure here that supports itself in terms of if you get it right. I mean, I think everyone gets the reward, including the player. Yeah, if his desire is to play in La Liga or the Bundesliga or the Premier League, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that's an embarrassing proposition for the Sounders. That's a wonderful proposition for the Sounders.
Well, let me phrase it a little differently then, which I think your answer is totally fair. But when you are talking to him, is that a subject that's explicitly coming up, saying, "Look, we know someday you'd love to play in Spain, and this is a great way of getting there," or is it that's sort of the unspoken element of it, and you're really pitching him on coming to Seattle and playing in MLS?
With some players, it's very explicit, and they'll tell you. With other players, they're a little bit more hidden. I think you saw in his press conference today, well-spoken, not afraid of his opinion, but well thought out. So was an exit spoken of? Sure. I mean, superficially, aesthetically, we discussed what his goals are. I can confidently tell you, and I've told you guys off the record, so there's no reason I shouldn't say this again, is if I talk to a 22, 23-year-old player from South America who tells me, I want to play in Seattle till I'm 35, I promise you we're not having a press conference saying we signed him. Right? And that's not a shot at us.
Right.
We are a high caliber, high performing organization that's going to continue to pursue championships. But ambition is ambition. And if you can't see beyond where you are, that limits you.
Right.
And so that part for me has to be part of the conversation. Was it specifically with Pedro? There was no specific. It wasn't like, I want to play here in 2-3 years.
Right.
No, but
I guess that's more my. This was not a situation of like, in 2 years.
It's one of my questions.
Right.
One of my questions when I sit down with a player is, what do you want?
Right.
What do you want out of this adventure? This is soccer. This isn't, you're not taking an executive role that you can see the retirement package in 35 years is going to look like X and blah, blah. No, you have this many years, if you're lucky, to accomplish a dream. And what is that dream? The next dream for him was to play here. And until that next step is defined, it's hard to speculate too far because there's so many great clubs in the world. There's so many great leagues in the world. We fit into some of these categories. That's why he's here. But we're not the only ones. And we have to respect that too. So to your point, got to talk about it. You have to. but after we talk about winning championships here.
Right.
And I think that's the key part there. And we've talked about this specific topic in the past because there are teams that buy players with the intent to sell them.
Yep.
You're buying players with the intent to win here. Whether he goes somewhere else and he is so good that you decide to sell him, then that's separate. Is that accurate of what you've told me in the past?
Yeah.
Because you said something a little bit more explicit, but
No, that's accurate. Look, when I'm called into or onto the ownership calls, I never want to sugarcoat anything. Those are the owners of our franchise. Those are owners of our vision. And the owner's vision, when I speak to them collectively, when I speak to Adrian individually, when I speak to Hugh Weber, when we meet, the goal is to win championships here. That's it. If that player doesn't help us win a championship, we shouldn't pursue him. All of these other ancillary aspects, they're coming. They're coming whether we like it or not.
Right.
Because if we do what we're setting out to do, we're going to attract a lot of attention because our league is legit now. We're watched all over the world now. We're scouted all over the world. And okay, people can argue about transfers and what's in and what's out, but it's coming. The momentum is there. It's not going away. It's the way it goes. Next year, we play in the Club World Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And if these boys have 2 or 3 good games in that, there's no better exposure.
We love you. Let's win another one.